Okay, this is the sit rep for day 30 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It is Friday, 25 March 2022, approximately 1200 hours Eastern. I'm trying to get this knocked out early today. Reminder, gotta throw these out there, otherwise I get people bitching about this in the comments. I do not support Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs in charge of Russia. I also do not support Zelensky and the oligarchs in charge of Ukraine, and I damn sure do not support the Nazi, neo-Nazi, or Bandera supporters in the Ukrainian military or government. As far as I'm concerned, those sons of bitches should be wiped out to a man, none left alive at the end of the war here. I get my information from multiple sources. I get them from mainstream media. I get them from alternative media. I get them from non-governmental organizations. I get them from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense when I can get information. I'm gathering stuff from all over the place, trying to get a picture of what's going on. Always keep in mind, here in the West, most of the information we're going to get is propaganda being fed to us to get the citizens in the West here, outside of Russia, to get us to support the war effort. And I do not. There's no reason why this war should continue at this point. All right. Civilian casualties. These numbers are from the United Nations. As always, I am not using the Ukrainian government's information, their numbers, because their numbers are inflated. Civilian killed, 977, wounded 1,594, refugees 3.7 million have fled the country. And remember, the estimates are a third of the people saying they are Ukrainian refugees are from other places who have slipped into the stream. Okay, losses on the battlefield here. First off, we'll do Russian casualties, and there are numbers all over the place on this. Russia did a report yesterday. Their official killed in action is 1,351, wounded 3,825. A Russian tabloid published an article yesterday after the release from the Russian government stating that the numbers they have received from their sources in the Russian Ministry of Defense, that the actual number is around 9,861 killed in action and 16,153 wounded in action in Ukraine. After these numbers were published, reportedly this media outlet was raided and forced to take down that information. NATO is currently doing a meeting in Brussels. At their press conference, they estimate the Russian casualties between 7,000 to 15,000, with the low end being numbers from the US Pentagon, the high end being from countries like Estonia. The Ukrainians are reporting they have killed over 16,500 Russian soldiers on the battlefield, and that is considered to be an inflated number. Russia has used over 1,100 missiles so far in the war. This missile usage has slowed down considerably from the first week. So is the Russians starting to run down on their stockpile, or have they expended the number that they allocated for the operation? Losses on the battlefield, and these are only from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. I do not have a independent confirmation on the different numbers this time. Ukraine is stating they have destroyed 561 tanks, 1,625 armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. They've destroyed 291 artillery pieces, 90 multiple launch rocket systems, 49 SAM systems, shot down 115 fixed-wing aircraft, shot down 125 helicopters, shot down 53 drones, destroyed 1,089 trucks of different types, mostly supply trucks, and destroyed 72 fuel trucks. The West is estimating now that the total casualties for the Russian military in Ukraine stands around 40,000. This includes killed in action, wounded in action, prisoners of war, and missing in action. These numbers are disputed though at the NATO meeting. Some saying they think it's more, others saying that's impossible to be that high. Remember, these numbers, the 40,000, this is across the board. This is not just killed. This is killed, wounded, taken prisoner, and missing. Now, for the Ukrainian losses, you can't get any numbers from them for equipment lost on the battlefield, like the Russians will not report it. The Russians are reporting they have killed over 14,000 Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield. Updates on the battlefield situation. The Ukrainian Army is counterattacking across the country. They reportedly have pushed Russian forces out of the suburbs of Kiev, both to the north and the east. And they are starting to recapture some of the smaller towns outside the suburbs. Right now it is thought that the Ukrainian forces have pushed the Russian front lines back a further 15 miles to a point approximately 40 miles from the center of Kiev. The heaviest fighting right now is being located around Irpin to the west, where the British Ministry of Defense is stating that from what they're seeing by satellite, the Ukrainian army could easily encircle the Russian forces in and around Irpin right now. Reportedly, up at Hostomel to the north, the airfield that they captured that they're trying to turn into the main hub for logistics flow into Ukraine for the push on Kiev. Russian engineers and Russian troops around there are erecting berms around the airfield to protect it from incoming fire. Around Kharkov, the Ukrainian army is currently fighting around Izium to retake the city. It was captured by the Russians a week and a half ago. Okay, down in the Crimea, Russian forces are still advancing back towards Mykolaiv, and the Ukrainian army is holding them off. Reportedly, the Russian Navy has now started shelling Mariupol for the first time during this war. There's also reports of the Russian Navy shelling Odessa heavily right now because the civilians and the military have been putting in numerous field fortifications, obstacles, and landmines to protect against the landing. The thoughts are that the Russian military is trying to keep the Ukrainians concentrating on the possibility of a naval landing while they're actually going to circle it in from the north here by going through Mykolaiv. But the Ukrainian army is putting up too much of a defense. I have 4 pages of notes to go through today, so it's going to be popping back and forth quite a bit. Okay, we'll go into Russians here. The Russian losses so far in the 4 weeks of this war now exceeds the total U.S. casualties during the entire 20 years of the global war on terrorism. And that's even by the estimated low numbers being reported by the Pentagon. I now have information on that other Russian general reportedly killed last weekend. He was killed on Saturday. Lieutenant General Andrei Mordachev was killed in action on the airfield near Kherson during a Ukrainian attack. Okay, report from, or estimate assessment of the situation here in the West. Retired U.S. military generals and colonels are now stating that the main reason so many Russian generals and high-ranking officers are dying is because of the structure of the Russian army. Orders and decisions are made at the top and then sent down. There is no NCO corps to speak of in the Russian military. So there's really no one to make decisions down at the lowest levels. So when major problems occur, a general has to move forward to the front lines, find out what's going on, make a decision, and unfuck the situation. When this is happening, the locations of these general officers is being found out by Ukrainian intelligence because of their bad communication security, using cell phones, using unencrypted radio traffic, which is then allowing the Ukrainian military to move snipers, hit teams, and artillery strikes onto the location where the general is at when they get within range. The U.S. Pentagon is now assessing that the total Russian military, not just within Ukraine, it has dropped to 90% combat capable because of the casualties and losses within Ukraine. Some more information on the purge of the Russian government currently going on right now because of the fuck up in Ukraine. FSB Chief, the replacement organization or successor organization to the KGB, the chief of their 5th Service Department, Colonel General Sergei Beseda and Deputy Anatoly Balyuk were removed, arrested, and charged with improper use of operational funds and providing flawed intelligence, which has led to the debacle inside Ukraine. Okay, Western intel sources in NATO are reporting that they are unable to identify an overall theater commander in charge of the Ukrainian operation, or even a headquarters in charge of the total operations. They state that it seems like each separate advance is essentially doing its own thing. They're not coordinating back and forth. They're not coordinating between the Russian Army and the Russian Air Force. And it looks like each individual push is competing for supplies, resources, and reinforcements. I can see what was attempted to be done here. Think of Berlin, 1945, where Stalin drew a line just short of Berlin. He didn't say this army or that army was going to attack and take Berlin. He let the generals choose who would make it there, and it turned into a race back and forth. Well, in this situation, it turned into a giant clusterfuck. Instead of Russian forces racing to take Kiev, they're competing against each other, and they're seriously screwing up on the battlefield. As I and Kaz were saying during a live stream yesterday, it's like they're sending in the 2nd string, 3rd string, or even just the people that were sitting in the crowd to take over and plan the operation. And that's all the notes I have down for the That's all the notes I have down that I can find here that are marked for the Russian military. And I know there's something I had gotten, and I can't find it now. Oh, here it is. Okay, down around Berdyansk, where the Russian naval infantry had done a landing in the first few days of the war, the Russians have turned it into a port for supplying the push on Mariupol and the units in this area up in here. Well, apparently the Ukrainians were able to slip within weapons range of the port, potentially into the port itself, and they destroyed the Russian naval landing ship Orsk while it was at port offloading munitions. And there are images that it looks like other ships that are at port are on fire and damaged. It's not known if this was done by rocket attack, if this was done by attack out of the water, by land, artillery, aircraft, or what happened. As I said, I got 4 pages of information I'm going through here that I've gathered the past few days. Alright, now let's go into Ukraine, information concerning them. It appears that the Ukrainian Army is essentially using evolved, old Imperial Russian tactics. They are trading space for time, putting in strong points in cities, and doing guerrilla harassment and lightning attacks on the rear areas of the advancing Russian columns. The space for time, though, in this situation, they're luring them through terrain that the Russians, well, we know their heavy equipment, their tanks can handle it, but their logistics can't, and it's getting bogged down, which is allowing the guerrilla elements to attack them and take them out. There are reports that the civilians are using phones behind the lines to call in intel reports to the Ukrainian government, which then passes the information on to the Ukrainian Army to locate Russian troop concentrations, identify advancing convoys, give locations where Russian units are at so that the Ukrainian military can hit them one way or another. Okay, everyone was wondering where the Ukrainian Air Force is at. Ukraine is currently operating around 55 aircraft. They don't want to be specific what the actual number is. There was a reporter that actually went in and met up with the Ukrainian Air Force, and he was allowed to, quote-unquote, observe the operations. The Ukrainian Air Force is mostly operating at night, which is also the time when the Russian Air Force flies in order to avoid the Ukrainian Army air defense, especially the Stingers. Common tactic that the Ukrainians are using is essentially a baited ambush to draw the Russian fighters into SAM kill zones. At which point they let the surface-to-air missiles go live, lock on to the Russian aircraft as the Ukrainian Air Force is bugging out of the area, and then Russian aircraft start falling from the skies. Reportedly, the Ukrainian pilots are also going toe-to-toe with the Ukrainian fighters, and they are getting in some kills. But they would not state how many, and they would not state how bad their losses have been in those situations. And this one will be funny for you. Ukrainian border guards are stopping transgenders at the border, turning them back and telling them to join the fight. The reason that they give the trainees as they're trying to flee the country is, you have penis, you man. Turn around, go around, act like a man, go to fight. Reportedly, the LGBT LMNOIP community of Europe is just furious about this, but they really don't know how to respond because they're supposed to give overwhelming support to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military, but here the Ukrainian government is telling trannies, their fellow LGBT whatevers, that, well, they need to identify according to the genitalia they have. So they're really conflicted on that one. Okay, we have a major intel coup if this is confirmed by the Ukrainian Army. The Ukrainian Army found and secured a mysterious shipping container found in the woods. To me, it looks like it's probably north of Kiev because there's a lot of woods up in that area. This container is believed to be the command post module for a Verruca 4 mobile electronic warfare system. This system locates, suppresses radars, AWACS symbols, and reconnaissance satellite symbols. They did not find the other parts of the system, like the antennas and stuff that go with it. But if this is confirmed that this is the command post module and this is able to be smuggled out of Ukraine, this is a huge intel coup for the West because this is one of their most technically advanced pieces of equipment in the Russian inventory, especially when it comes to electronic warfare. Okay, for the Ukrainians, there are reports of private civilian groups in Europe are smuggling needed supplies across the border to pass off to Ukrainian army and militias. Things they're supplying include refurbished civilian and donated civilian jeeps, night vision goggles, body armor, medical supplies of all types, ATVs, pickups, TA-50 of all types, and food supplies. The Ukrainian troops, when they get to the rally point where they meet up with these civilian convoys inside Ukrainian territory, they told reporters that they get the weapons from the West and they're grateful for those, but that the Western governments are overlooking things like supplying them with food and basic gear. And they're grateful that these civilian organizations, these civilian groups, are thinking of that and smuggling it in. Zelensky has now said that any peace deal that is reached at the negotiating table can only happen if it is approved by a referendum of the people, a vote. And everyone is pointing out, how the hell are you going to hold a referendum, especially in occupied territories, in a war? So it's seriously, this shows you that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government are the ones trying to keep the war going. It is not the Russians. It is the Ukrainian government. And it's now been admitted or confirmed that the Russian reports on the activities of the Ukrainian army before the invasion were correct. It's now admitted, and I did not find the source of this admission, if it was a NATO intel source admitting this or if it was the US Pentagon or where it was, but it has been admitted now that the Ukrainian army had massed over 2/3 of its combat forces on the borders of the separatist regions in the Donbass before the Russian invasion. It is cited that from these sources that are admitting this stuff, that around 150,000 Ukrainian soldiers had massed to retake the Donbass, and that the week leading up to the invasion, the Ukrainian army had increased its shelling and rocket attacks on the region. So the Russians did not lie on that one. Story came out yesterday because of the NATO meeting in Brussels. Zelensky has asked for unlimited power. I mean, he's asking NATO to give unlimited, unrestricted access to the entire NATO arsenal of weapons, munitions, and equipment. He wants access to anything comparable to whatever Russia has in their military inventories. As soon as I read that, I questioned, does that mean that he wants access to NATO's nukes? Does he want access to NATO's long-range bombers? Maybe to NATO's own chemical and biological weapons inventories, which they have, which they won't admit? Does he also want access to the other more advanced technologies, like the space-based weapons platforms, which they don't talk about openly, are banned by treaty, but it is an open known thing that Russia and NATO, especially the United States, have these weapons platforms. Oof. Reportedly, Zelensky is trying to pressure other countries right now for equipment, and I mean actually pressure. He's trying to convince the U.S. government at the NATO meeting to start handing over Patriot missile systems. He reportedly is trying to sucker the Israelis into supplying an Iron Dome defense system for use in Ukraine also. Yeah. Reportedly this morning, Zelensky is now demanding of NATO that they turn over a minimum of 1% of their equipment in their arsenals to Ukraine to fight Russia. Of everything, 1% of everything. And he is reportedly throwing a tantrum to the American delegation, demanding that they supply Ukraine with 1,000 missiles minimum per day, with at least 500 javelins, at least 500 stingers be provided to Ukraine every day. Like I said, Verruca Salt. I said that a couple days ago. He wants it now. He wants it right now. Okay, I got to go back and find my NATO info here. I'll start with this one first. Fox News has really been playing up a poll that they did that shows 78% of Americans support sending significant military aid and equipment such as tanks and MiGs to Ukraine. What they don't tell you is the other information in the survey. When the people that are polled are told that this would likely lead to war with Russia because the Russian government has stated if Ukraine is supplied with tanks or with aircraft, they consider it a declaration of war by that country against Russia. The support for unended and uncapped warfare in Ukraine drops to 36%. Fox News is reporting that 80% of Americans support more sanctions against Russia, to include blocking all of their exports on the international markets. When those surveyed are then told, well, when that happens, you're going to see even higher prices here at home, and more economic hardships and issues with items being in stores, the support for the additional sanctions drops to 44%. Now, the best part is on this survey, they got some general demographic information. They found that the people that were the hardest core for more sanctions, for sending everything to Ukraine, even after being told the hardships, that these hardcores are overwhelmingly vaxxed. And that they find that the people that change their minds on whether they support this, and also the people that did not support that, that want a diplomatic course of action to end the war in Ukraine, they are overwhelmingly unvaxxed. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. Poland reportedly has drawn up plans now to send 10,000 peacekeepers into Ukraine. They are awaiting approval from Biden and NATO command. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, made a public statement on this. Our Polish colleagues have already stated that there will be a NATO summit now and peacekeepers should be deployed. I hope they understand what is at stake. This will be a direct clash between Russia and NATO armed forces, which everyone not only wanted to avoid, but said it should never take place in principle. Reportedly part of the Polish peacekeeper plan into Ukraine, part of the plan includes a quote-unquote limited no-fly zone to patrol over the humanitarian corridors. Anyone want to take a guess what will happen as soon as the first Polish serviceman gets killed or that first Polish aircraft gets shot down? Okay, it's now being reported by the U.S. Department of Defense that any U.S. servicemen, active duty, reserve, or guard, who go AWOL to serve in Ukraine will face consequences on their return. At a minimum, days going to Leavenworth. Okay, equipment. Britain is now sending 6,000 additional missiles and $40 million, but in euros, to pay Ukrainian troops and pilots, and reportedly these missiles are starting to arrive in Ukraine today. Germany is now fast-tracking the approval to send additional 2,000 anti-tank weapons and former East German equipment to Ukraine. This is on top of what they've already approved to go. In the East German equipment includes large numbers of SA-7s. These are a 1960s era surface-to-air missile similar to the Stinger. Actually, it's comparable to the older Red-Eye. Reportedly in Germany, started earlier this week, they are raiding the homes and arresting people for making insulting and hurtful social media comments about politicians. So it's not just Russia that's cracking down on their free speech of their people. It's happening across Europe, and they're trying to do it here in the US too. And this one will make your blood boil. Reportedly, reporters at the NATO meeting in Brussels yesterday attacked Biden when he did his press conference. They attacked him for being too quick to rule out World War III as an option when it comes to the war in Ukraine. I shit you not, the reporters are saying NATO must immediately go to war against Russia. They want World War III. These people are fucking insane. There is a general note on here, because remember, Ukraine reportedly was starting to get kamikaze drones, the switchblades, for use on the battlefield. Well, apparently the Russians are employing their own version on the battlefield now. And people that are familiar with these drones have pointed out that some of these drones, like the ones that are being supplied to the Ukrainians, have facial recognition capabilities. So they can be used for assassinating specific people on the battlefield. Yeah. Oh, and I have a confirmation now as to how Ukraine or NATO is getting equipment into Ukraine. I figured they were passing it into Ukraine over the old smuggling routes, and that essentially has been confirmed now. There is always back roads that do not appear on the maps. Some of these routes have been there for centuries. They're referred to as smugglers' routes. And apparently NATO is shipping some of that equipment, or a good amount of it, across those routes to get it past Russian surveillance. This is also how they're able to get food items and other supplies into Ukraine, both for the black market and by the civilians to pass off to the Ukrainian military. The reason they're doing that is pretty simple. The major routes are being heavily observed by Wagner Group, Russian Spetsnaz, and their satellites, where they may not necessarily be aware of the smuggler route in that area. Propaganda push I'm seeing right now. They're really playing it up that Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine, but at the same time, the U.S. Pentagon, U.S. government is not admitting the war crimes being committed by the Ukrainian forces, especially the neo-Nazi units in the Ukrainian military, like the Azov Battalion, like Right Sector, like C-14, like Dnipro, like Adar battalions. They're also playing it up that they believe a chemical or biological attack will occur at any minute in Ukraine because of the Russian military being stalled. The Pentagon is stating they see no indications of any type of preparations for a launch of a chemical or biological attack by Russian forces. They are not seeing any NBC munitions being moved to the front lines, and I guarantee we got satellites and aircraft monitoring those locations where they're stored. Pentagon's not seeing any movement, but the media and the U.S. government is still playing it up that it's a for sure thing going to happen any moment. My personal feelings are we're giving the proxies in that area the go to do it, to launch these attacks against the Ukrainian forces or against the Russian forces, to goad them into using their own weapons against the Ukrainians so that they can cry war crime, war crime, war crime, and get NATO directly involved with boots on the ground and planes in the air. That's all I got for today. It's likely the next sit rep will be next Monday unless there's a major change on the battlefield before then. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.